You're listening to Agile Ideas, the podcast, hosted by Fatima Abuchi. For anyone listening out there not having a good day, please know there is help out there. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Agile Ideas, the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Fatima Abuchi, CEO at Agile Management Office, Mental Health Ambassador, and your host. On today's episode, we have Anthony Stevens, aka Ant. Anthony is former partner and chief digital officer at KPMG and a published author of Chasing Digital, a playbook for the new economy. Before KPMG, Anthony held senior executive roles for publicly listed and private businesses and was the founder and non-executive director of several high-growth technology startups. Anthony Stevens is a thought leader and visionary in the field of artificial intelligence. As the founder and CEO of 6 Clicks, an AI-powered software as a service platform for risk management and compliance, he is a pioneer in the industry. Anthony has extensive experience in digital transformation and the application of advanced technologies, which he shares in his book, Chasing Digital, a playbook for the new economy. And before founding 6 Clicks, Anthony held several executive roles, including where he led the digital transformation of the firm's business model at KPMG. He holds a Bachelor of Commerce, a Bachelor of Information Systems, and a Master's of Commercial Law from the University of Melbourne, and is also a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. And he was also named Young Executive of the Year in 2011 by AFR Boss. As a passionate technology advocate, Anthony is dedicated to helping companies leverage AI to create more efficient and effective operations and drive digital transformation. His 6 Clicks platform is guiding global businesses through the game-changing use of AI. Under his leadership, businesses trust 6 Clicks to revolutionize their risk and compliance programs. Very interesting conversation coming right up, and please join me in welcoming Ant to the show. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
It's amazing how I was doing research about, we've obviously known each other for a little while, but doing research and learned so many new things. So I'm excited to sort of dig into that today and talk about a range of different things. But I wanted to start with something that was quite fascinating, because when you were 13, you taught yourself how to program. And this is like really early on in terms of, computers. How did you teach, like, where did you start and how did that come about?
Well, yeah, I'm a little older now, that's for sure. But I guess my dad was an academic, and he'd, long story, but basically had been gifted an Apple Mac by Apple for writing some research for those guys. And he had a PC on his desk at work, and ultimately didn't have anywhere else to bring this other PC, so brought it home on the Mac. I just I think Dad was, if I remember correctly, Dad was sort of doing some work with a particular language. Maybe one of his team was researching the application of that for some of his educational needs. And I kind of just jumped into it and started to create a game. It was sort of one of those things that you do as a kid. How can you create some sort of like decision tree, what if type process? So one thing led to another, and I sort of just kept scratching the surface, and ultimately learned how to string together things programmatically. So I guess that's how you teach yourself to write code. It's just a language.
Amazing. And obviously you've taken that with you for all of the things you've been doing so far from that space. With having parents in education and technology, how did that influence? Was it, constantly talking about tech and you started learning it from a really young age, and obviously then you taught yourself to code? Was that just sort of part of the upbringing?
I think actually probably, my parents were always big into sort of education and learning, full stop. And then because of the work that my dad was doing, he was one of the pioneers bringing the internet and computers to music education. And so in bringing the internet to music education, it was like a lot of universities, they're actually quite early adopters of some of this technology for research purposes. So he had back in the day, had one of those phones connected to suction cups, to drive sort of dial-up modem type activity and bulletin boards. I mean, this is really, to give you a sort of time marker, this would have been mid-80s, a long time ago. And so, just understanding or thinking about what does the internet mean? How does a computer connect via some network? I mean, the concept of a network was very early. How does a computer connect to a network? And then how do we share data between each other? Was a really novel concept, right? And back in the day, you did that over the telephone wire. It's very different now, of course, but I think all of that just begs lots of questions. I mean, I was always, my dad didn't really, I mean, he was not a technologist per se. He wasn't an engineer, but he was using technology and applying technology to different ways of working, or in his case, educating. So I guess he had that in his DNA, and I picked up on some of that. And it never leaves you when you get to experience it at that age.
I think you generally have a knack for it, or you don't. At least I don't have a technical bone in my body, but some of us do. So before we get into talking about your businesses, and I didn't realize that you'd done quite a lot of different businesses in your past. But before you did that, one of your key roles was as the Chief Digital Officer in KPMG. I'm kind of curious because I'm in consulting in a business as well, and left corporate to sort of pursue entrepreneurial ventures like yourself. So what was it about the move from a just giant consulting firm to a small business, and how was that shift, and what inspired it?
Yeah, I think I mean, I was at KPMG. I had a great time at KPMG. It's an interesting business, but it's a really big business. And like any big business, there's lots of stakeholders and lots of things that you've got to line up before you can get stuff done. Which is all fine, but I think kind of as I'd probably spent about 25 years in various corporate roles until I left there, and I sort of asked myself the question: what did I get the most satisfaction from doing? What drove me the most? What did I love the most? Because I think it's one of those things that if you love what you do, you need to love what you do in order to kind of get through the tough stuff. Because otherwise, as I'm sure you can't keep going, or you don't want to keep going. So I sort of thought, okay, let me go back to my roots. My roots were, per your previous question, very much around innovation and technology and the application of that to business. And I saw, in actual fact, when I was at KPMG, I saw a significant opportunity in the GRC market, which is obviously the market that we went into with 6 Clicks. But to me, that just represented, if you look at that market, and anyone will tell you who's experienced anything to do with that space, there's lots of really old software out there, and there's hundreds of different platforms and tools and bits and pieces. And to me, any market like that that's highly fragmented and largely legacy represents opportunity. So for me, it was a combination of the opportunity and doing something I love that, I thought, well, you've got to expose yourself. You've got to put yourself in a situation where you need to do something different. And that's what I did.
It's interesting. So for those that are listening that don't know what GRC, governance, risk and compliance, is what it stands for, most people roll their eyes when they hear governance and risk. Right. It sounds like overly boring, or just something that people don't want to really pay attention to. What does it actually mean to you, and why is it so important? And why do you think we get that reaction? I definitely have seen it. Is it because people don't understand it?
I think everyone understands it today in 2023, understands it, maybe wouldn't describe it as GRC, but understands it because they know, as either a consumer or as a business, the effects of doing business with a company or interacting with a company that doesn't have a strong capability around GRC, and that is, the erosion of trust, right? Ultimately, you see companies that get hacked, our data as a consumer gets lost. Naturally, we feel aggrieved at that and concerned that it's going to happen again, and there's not much we can do about it, right? I mean, as consumers at least. And then when you think about businesses, same issues are pervasive, just at a slightly different level, all about reputation, about trust. about, whether it's government related stuff, it's about data sovereignty, it's about privacy. So all of those issues, I think, impact us, whether we understand anything about GRC or not. The reality is, for most companies to manage those sorts of issues and get on the front foot, they need to think about governance, risk, and compliance. And our software simply helps that do that in an effective way across a range of different use cases for organizations of different shapes and sizes. Simple as that, really.
And it's interesting because, if I compare some of the journeys of different companies, we've worked with very large banks and then some of these smaller businesses as well. Even the most mature of organizations, maybe it's changing in the last few years compared to maybe 10 years ago, but fundamentally they're running their entire GRC type operations off spreadsheets.
Yeah.
And it's not the spreadsheets that I have an issue with, because we know it can do amazing things, using tools like Excel, but it's just the fragmented way that they're running it across their business. And you see things like duplication and risks that don't get flagged at the right level, and just governance being an afterthought, waiting for problems to arise. What are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing with companies or with your clients, before they move to a different approach to GRC?
Yeah, I think your observation's spot on, and there's a reason behind why people use spreadsheets, and it's that reason we actually sort of founded the company on. To me, it comes down to, kind of largely speaking, two problems. One is that most of the software out there is kind of hard to use, and not particularly user friendly and hard to deploy, which I'll come back to in a minute. And the second one is that a lot of the GRC software is kind of effective for one use case for one part of the organization, and people get it working in inverted commas there, but it's very difficult to get it working across an entire organization, because you have to configure the software to meet so many different needs and requirements across the business.
Mm-hmm.
And people give up on that, right? It just becomes this huge monolithic project. They spend millions of dollars trying to get a one-size-fits-all approach. And ultimately, people run out of steam, they run out of budget, and they revert back to spreadsheets. Mm-hmm. Or they've tried to get that to work, because it's monolithic, because it's a single system for everyone across the organization. They end up in a situation where no one's really happy, right? You've got this sort of one-size-fits-all model. No one's really happy. And to get what they need done efficiently, they, spin back and use spreadsheets. So for us, when it's a complex problem to solve, actually. I mean, it's one of those things that you can describe easily. And people all know what you're talking about. Typically, they've either done it themselves or they can certainly empathize. But to actually solve that problem, we felt, needed kind of a completely different approach. So our approach to that, in a nutshell, is effectively multi-tenancy at the customer level, which is a bit of a technical term, mm-hmm. but basically means you can run multiple individual teams of 6 clicks, a full-fledged GRC system in its own right, all connected to a mothership, to give you that balance of autonomy at an individual team level. So you get the benefits of being able to do things in the same way that you would do in a spreadsheet, customize it to meet your needs, only have the people that you're working with use it, et cetera, but at the same time be connected back to your overall set of corporate standards and reporting obligations across the organization. Mm. So unless you build software in that way, which is a very different type of approach, mm-hmm. It's impossible to overcome that kind of spreadsheet dilemma, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, 100%. And even when companies I've seen have attempted to solve that problem with different technology solutions, I know that projects, we use something completely different. Then internal audit has usually a system, probably the most advanced, probably one of the ones that has some of the things. And then HR has to meet regulations, compliance, they track something. And then you've got operational risk who have their own, ORC register. So that's, to your point, exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
And they're all...
Everyone's got different needs, but it's just not that their needs are different. I think also the context in which they're operating is different by definition.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're working, I mean, in your world, you work a lot on projects, right? It makes sense for you and your team and your stakeholders, the people you're working with, to log onto a system, and all of the stuff in the system relates to the project that you're working on.
100%.
It'd be disconcerting, right? If you're logged onto the system and there's all this stuff about, cybersecurity risks over with the IT people, HR staff, other things that you could probably wrap your head around and say, yeah, I understand why they're there, but it's going to derail you. You're going to feel like you're at a party where you didn't get an invite. You can probably have a few drinks and try and enjoy yourself, but it's going to feel a bit strange because you're not going to have any friends. So I think, what we try to do, what we focus on heavily, is saying the context in which you operate needs to make sense for the job that you've got to do, and the way in which the system's configured and the stuff that you do within it needs to align very, very closely with the requirements that you've got. But at the same time, be connected back to, the corporate center of the organization that's interested in reporting, and secondly, interested in standards, as in standards across the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And so we call that approach hub and spoke, which, as the name suggests, is exactly the way it's been designed. So we pioneered that model and approach back in 2019. It's kind of core to our business model. That's what we do. That's what we focus on, and they're the customers that we work with have, requirements along those lines.
And I'm just thinking about, you mentioned regulation. So having a lot of experience in the banking financial sector, the regulations are constantly changing. And one of the things that I liked about the product and the platform is that you're keeping up to date with the regulations and providing them. So tell us a little bit about that. How does that work?
Yeah, so that's the other thing that I think, a lot of software out there, not necessarily GRC software, but even if we just think about consumer stuff, the reason why the iPhone or the Android platform is successful is, it's a great form factor and the operating system's good, but really what everyone does when they log onto the system is they go to the App Store and they start downloading stuff that they need.
Yep.
It's the same in the world of GRC, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can have a whole heap of forms and workflow and even some artificial intelligence and stuff like that. But ultimately you need content, and the content is in the GRC world, standards, laws, regulations, risk libraries, audit templates, et cetera, et cetera. And so for us, we thought about, rather than having that as an afterthought, something you've got to kind of import separately, which always sucks, to have that kind of baked into the tool. So you could go in the 6 clicks world, you go to the content library, pick and choose the stuff that you need. It rockets itself into your account within a couple of seconds, and then away you go. And we focus on that to help organizations keep up to date with the content, which is sort of, was your question, but also to help them get up and running quickly, because otherwise you spend weeks and months, importing data, which is hard work. And also intellectual property that's out there. We have some risk libraries from industry experts. We have audit templates. We have control sets. We have all sorts of stuff that other people have said, hey, this might be useful. And we make that available to all our customers, or our managed service providers or advisory firms that use our platform. They embed their own intellectual property in the platform, and they make that, exclusively available just to their customers, not to anyone else. So, yeah.
And then thinking about just in general, I'm seeing we had an academic on talking about ESG and how that environmental social governance is growing, and I'm seeing that in the last 5 years more than ever before. Has that helped drive greater awareness to this space? Obviously,
I think so. Yeah, I think I would sort of say probably. I mean, we founded 6 Clicks in 2019. We launched the platform at the start of 2020. Cybersecurity back then, I think people were aware of it. It was a concern, certainly within the IT landscape, but I don't know that boards of directors and very, senior executives kind of had cyber as the top 10 issue. Now I think, wind the clock forward 3 or 4 years, it's certainly, I think if you look at most of those board surveys out there, it's, number 1 or number 2 on the, the risk profile for most senior executives and boards. And I think ESG is kind of the next wave, right? Like, it's increasing, obviously, as consumers, where we're all very aware of, the environment. I certainly am. I'm sure everyone is. I'm sure you are. The environment and conservation and sustainability, and that's going to ricochet itself into the boardroom, and of course the regulators are putting in place measures to continue to increase that bar. Rather than just being aware of it, rather than just making reference in the annual report, like cybersecurity, people are going to have to report on it. They're going to have to put metrics around it. They're going to have to start putting policies and procedures. And I think that's a good thing. But look, I'd say it's like a long burn, right? It's not going to sort of happen overnight, but I think we're going to see a lot more focus on ESG over the next couple of years.
It's definitely, absolutely growing in popularity and interest. So
yeah.
What about, you mentioned regulators? I'm just curious, this again, thinking selfishly from a banking financial space, surely the regulators would love what you're doing. Do you what's the feedback you're getting?
Look, I think it makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, regulators have got lots of customers, lots of regulated entities that they need to work with. Our platform lends itself really well with that. We do a bunch of work actually with different sort of compliance obligations, at the defence level, at the federal government level, locally and overseas, of course, as well, where organisations pull together, use our platform to basically help ensure the compliance against a particular framework or standard of their membership community. And the membership community might be literally members, it might be regulated entities, it might be customers, it might be portfolio companies, a whole heap of different use cases where that hub and spoke architecture, makes a lot of sense.
Amazing. Thinking just about, you started only not that long ago. When you think about, it's been a really short, effectively still a startup, really. Tell me about, like, when you set it up, thinking from an entrepreneurship perspective. And I know you've got previous businesses experience, which I didn't know till recently. But did everything go according to plan when you were starting out? Like, how did you know what to focus on first, second, third, when I'm sure you had a lot of fires to fight while you're building the business? Like, what's some learnings you can share?
I think, the learning that sort of keeps coming back is to double down on a point of difference. I mean, I think there's this balance when you start a business. We certainly found that with 6 Clicks is to at one level make sure you've got a point of differentiation, but at another level make sure that your product meets a diverse range of needs, and that you've got customers who are, that your product solves their problem. There's no point having something that's highly differentiated but doesn't solve the problem, right? And so that's a balance. It's a balance that I think we've sort of ebbed and flowed on either side of that. Well, on one moment being very differentiated, another moment focusing on just solving problems that customers have got. But interestingly, now I look back 3 years ago, there were 3 things that we focused on very heavily when we founded the company as being what makes us different. And they were the hub and spoke architecture we've spoken about, integrated content, which we touched on, and the third thing was artificial intelligence. And we defined those 3 things back at the start. Now, over time, we've invested more or less in those things, depending on what else is happening in the business. But it's interesting, 3 years later, there's still the 3 things that people buy our software for, and see us as points of differentiation. So I would sort of, advise anyone going through that process again is, make sure you do, truly have a point of differentiation, not just a new user interface, not just a new logo, not just a new color palette or whatever, but something that is genuinely different than anyone else. And stick to that. Be confident. It's hard because you get a lot of people throwing a lot of rocks at you, but it's worth it in the long run because it's a story that you can tell, and it's a promise that you can stand behind because you built the company that way.
And it gives you a North Star somewhere for you and your
Yeah.
team, which is ever growing to head towards. And the rocks analogy, the roller coaster of emotion that is business. That's
Yeah,
part of it.
100%.
I think those 3 points are really relevant, and it's obviously stuff that we've been seeing with the work that you've been doing, and we've been talking to your team and learning a lot about that. Thinking about the AI space, I know that sort of has evolved in the last couple of years. I think you've evolved it. So tell us a little bit about your AI input. Or I'm not sure what you call it, but Haley.
Yeah, Haley,
Name.
that's right.
What is Haley exactly? And especially for those novices in AI, what exactly is AI doing to help in the
Right.
GRC space?
So what I'll share with you the backstory, because in actual fact, when we founded, Louis and I and Andrew founded the company back in, it sort of was about mid 2019. And it was actually very soon after we founded the company, before we had a product, right, that we saw the opportunity for the application of artificial intelligence to GRC. So actually embedding artificial intelligence in the product itself. And the question that, always comes up is, to do what? Like, what exactly does the AI do that makes the user's life and experience better? And the answer to that is, we had basically two initial problems. So by problems, I mean things that, people would do in spreadsheets and have done in spreadsheets for, 30, 40 years. But we saw as being very time consuming, very manual, prone to error, prone to variance, and could ultimately be automated a lot more effectively. And those two things were identifying overlaps between compliance requirements. So think standards, laws, regulations, any of that. You got two of these things. One's in, take for Australia, take a New South Wales cybersecurity standard and compare it to the Victorian one. We all know intuitively that they're probably pretty much the same thing, right? The overlap between those is probably 80, 90%, if not more. So what people did in the past was basically get, if you can imagine a spreadsheet with two tabs, one tab with the Victorian requirements, one tab with the New South Wales requirements, basically VLOOKUPs and, pivot tables and whatever, muck around with all of that, and then you work out what the overlap is. And by doing that, you would reduce your compliance landscape, right? The actual requirements overall would be lower because you just need to look at where the gaps are. So that was sort of requirement number one. Requirement number two was to take a policy, which is made up of a number of controls that a company's written, and that's in 6 clicks, and basically scan that for gaps against regulation or standards or a framework. And that's a very common problem, right? Companies have policies. They suspect they're outdated, but they don't know where and they don't know how. So they, our tool Haley allows you to basically take one of those control sets or policies, scan it against X, Y, and Z regulation, and identify where the gaps are. If you wind the clock, so we released both of those in probably August, September 2020. So not too soon after we launched the product, actually. And they've sort of matured, bubbled away for the last couple of years. And then at the start of this year, 2023, we released a integration with ChatGPT, which allows people to basically automatically write their policies and control sets based on a standard within the 6 clicks tool. And we've all seen how this works, right, in our day-to-day lives with, you can get ChatGPT, you can write a couple of dot points and then it will fill it out and make it a paragraph or two. So we've embedded that within our platform, but with a lot of sort of smarts and intelligence baked around it with, based on the 6 clicks world, I guess. Now where I won't share the full details of it with you today because it's embargoed and we're probably a few weeks away from the press release, but we've been working for probably the balance of this year on the next generation of artificial intelligence or Haley baked into 6 clicks, which will help automate just about every module in the platform: audits, assessment, vendor response, risk management, controls, obligation mapping, a whole heap of stuff that is, quite phenomenal.
Wow.
So, this Haley journey for us is, we've got pedigree. We started it very proudly back in 2020. We're not sort of Johnny-come-latelys to the AI scene in GRC, and we've been pioneers in that market.
It's
So,
interesting you mentioned ChatGPT. I was going to ask about that. I was having this conversation with someone this week, and where they say they're an AI driven company, and all they've done is they just use ChatGPT. So I'm like,
right. There's lots of those. There's lots of those sort of AI tech startups out there, and look, I think there's lots of opportunity in that space, but for us, the thing that's really important is not the technology itself, although that's obviously revolutionary, but is the application of that technology to the problems that our customers have got.
Yeah.
And that's what we focus on. What is the pain and what is the solution? And how does artificial intelligence make that solution infinitely better than the current way that they're operating?
Yeah.
That is the day after day after day. That is the mantra within the business, the thing that we focus on more than anything else.
And I like that it links back to the third point that you made at the beginning of the 3 things that are your North Stars. You haven't
100%
away from them. You could do what a lot of PPM, portfolio project management tools do. I know it's not a comparison, but just thinking about that market, it's saturated now. Every man and his dog has a tool that's doing everything you can think of, but no one's actually really solving the problems that exist in the project management officer space. So there's just abundance of tools for the tool's sake. So
that's right. You've got to be careful because technology's nowadays kind of easy, right? I mean, look, some of our competitors are old pieces of software been around for 20 years. It's not so easy for them.
Yes.
But there's also some contemporary software out there. So everyone can apply artificial intelligence. The question is the R&D that you do to understand genuinely what the problem is that you're solving. And I think that's the trick.
And I like the fact that you're focusing on how to not only improve workflows, but actually increase the efficiency of those teams so they can actually focus on solving the problems that are rising as opposed to
100%.
Capturing the data, which no one likes spending time capturing data. So thinking about technology in general, and I know you've spent most of your career in this space, what other sort of technological advancements can we keep an eye out for that are, that you're seeing, all the trends in the industry at the moment? I mean, AI, we've talked about one of them. Is there any others that sort of come to mind?
Yeah, I've got my eye on a couple of areas that I think are still, kind of dinosaur-esque. That I think will, change or be disrupted over the next few years. One of those is content. I touched on that before. We define content as standards, laws, regulations, all that kind of stuff. It's the case today that there are providers out there that sort of are in the content business, sort of mashing together stuff and, trying to make sense of it and put it in a digital form. I just think ultimately that's pretty dated, the way a lot of that operates. And also content from, advisors or MSPs that, is useful intellectual property. How do we make that really scalable and a business model in its own right for advisors and MSPs? So we're very focused on sort of getting that right as well. So, I think the world of content will change over the next couple of years. Artificial intelligence has got a long way to go. I think we're just seeing, it's the drop in the ocean at this stage in terms of the innovation in that space. And then ultimately, I think sort of the way in which a platform like ours is used around the world will change as well, right? It'll be deployed in all sorts of countries for all sorts of different use cases, and who knows where that'll end up. So.
And what sort of advice can you give to small businesses or technology novices like myself that don't really understand that sort of landscape so much? Like, where would you recommend we start to make sure that we're not missing what you like?
Right. I actually think there's a bunch of things that you can, every business kind of has a sense of the problem that they want to solve. But one of the things we encourage a lot of businesses to do is identify or look out for what we call red flags when it comes to, providers in this space. And right, what I mean by red flags is characteristics of their business or their software that would indicate that partnership might be not such a great idea. As an example, a lot of GRC software vendors out there are kind of actually services businesses, right? They sell a piece of software, but then you spend forever trying to implement it and configure it and customize it. And before you know it, you've spent $1 on the software, but you've spent $10 on the services. And in my view, that indicates the sort of maturity and the contemporary nature of the software itself. And we would say just look out for those things, right? Like try and avoid software that falls into these buckets. And outside of that, find something that, culturally aligns with the way that you want to do business. So in our view, there's, great services businesses like yours, working with clients, helping them solve a whole heap of problems. They're critical, but it tends to be the case that services businesses are not great software businesses, and conversely, software businesses are not great services businesses. So, it's things like that I think are really important to recognize in the way that you make a decision around, software that might help you.
Yeah, I think it's a good call out. I tend to agree on the services versus software. I think not every company, but I think there's a lot are really good at services or they're really good at software. Yeah. We've got like all of these areas and capabilities that we work with customers on, but we integrate products like yours included that we know will fit the need, but provide that sort of best in class services we can, as opposed to spending our time building the software. Yeah. Exactly. It just makes no sense. So, but yeah, no, that's a couple of good examples there.
Yeah.
I'm kind of keen just to move into a little bit more about just thinking again from a selfish perspective, your entrepreneurial journey, and now sort of having gone from a big corporate most of your career and then moving into small business. What would you say the biggest differences are in being a very senior in a big business versus a small business?
I think there's probably lots of cliches there, but accountability is obviously one of those. It's very difficult in a big business. The measurement of success and the measurement of accountability is pretty blurred. I think the bigger the business gets, it becomes harder to kind of measure performance. And so, because there's more stakeholders, it's not a critical thing. It's just the reality that you just get so many stakeholders that, it's hard to nail something down. But I think in a smaller business, there's a lot more accountability. Agility is a big thing. Like I've always enjoyed moving really quickly. I just kind of enjoy the pace of making decisions. I sort of take a risk-based view on decision making itself. So, you accept the fact that not everything's going to work, and you embrace failure. You learn as many lessons as you possibly can. But I think big businesses struggle with that approach inherently. They try really hard, I must say. Like in my experience, they really do want to move in an agile manner and make decisions quickly. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of overarching forces at play, be it stakeholder management, politics, general communication and stuff like that, that sort of trumps agility or trumps the ability to move quickly. At least that's been my experience.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, the other thing you've got to think about is economically in a sort of small business, you've got to be really focused.
Yes.
You don't, big businesses with, billion-dollar balance sheets and so on. I mean, a couple of million here and there kind of doesn't matter in some organizations, but, when you're running a smaller business, I mean, I think we would now be past the startup stage where we're sort of a global business now with hundreds of customers around the world. But, I think, nevertheless, you've still got to focus very, very acutely on, economics and, doing the right thing in terms of, your shareholders.
100%. I was going to say bootstrapping as well, which is usually the
Yeah.
first thing you have to start with. I know that's something we've started and I guess maintained for a while. It's interesting because the big corporate space and the agility and all those things you mentioned there. I remember working before setting up Agile Management Office about 7.5 years ago. One of the reasons I left big corporate was we just weren't getting any traction on, some really significant wins. And myself and a number of portfolio directors at the time had, we're trying to convince, the Australian division of the bank to make certain changes based on evidential facts of results they had got, and they just weren't listening. So I said to my colleagues at the time, look, I'll leave, set up a business, and I'm sure I'll come back as a consultant. And surprise, surprise, this is what happened.
Yeah.
So,
I'm not surprised.
they don't want to listen if you're in there. You have to leave and come back. I don't know.
Yeah, it's almost, it's a lot of it's about perspective. And I think in my case, it's also interesting when you're running a software business or a technology business as we are, the sort of things that you really need to focus on are quite acute. There's not too many of them, and you've just got to nail them. There's not too much of a room for error. So big corporates, it's a little different. There's always, multitude of different agendas and things that you've got to keep an eye on.
100%, and layers and layers and layers of decision making that just means nothing gets done. You've grown your how many people in your team now at 6 Clicks?
It's about 45, 50.
Wow, that's amazing. I think when we first met you were 2 or 3 of
you. It was 2 or 3 of us, I'm sure.
It's great. And I've had the pleasure of actually dealing with your team, and even in recent weeks we've been collaborating, and it's been really great. They've been really phenomenal to deal with. Fantastic. Tell me, how do you motivate the team, and what's good leadership like? Because obviously it's working because your people are great. So tell me a little bit about any tips or tricks.
I reckon one of the things that I've sort of learned, not necessarily at 6 Clicks, but just over my career, is one of the things that motivates people and connects people is progress. And if you feel as if your organization and your contribution is resulting in progress, and define that however you like, but ultimately the ball's moving forward, it's a really good way to, bring everyone together and create tons of motivation and inertia, of course. I think about that in the reverse, when you see organizations or teams where nothing really gets done. You get to the end of the year and lots of people have turned the handle, but there's no real progress.
Mm-hmm.
You tend to find those environments pretty slow, culturally backward, not particularly high energy. So we focus very much on a high energy, agile, lessons orientated or learning orientated culture, and we focus on making progress, whether it's new customers that we're working with, whether it's new enhancements or improvements or releases to our platform, or whether that's even the way in which we operationally do things. Like it's a big focus of ours at the moment is how do we actually drive efficiency, not just for economic reasons, but to deliver better outcomes, happier customers ultimately. How do we get our processes, really tightly defined and highly repeatable? And that's very much the focus at the moment. So all of those areas equate to progress, and all of that progress means people are pretty motivated and happy, I think.
You hit the nail on the head around processes. One of my favorite things to hear is you've got to define and understand your process before you automate it. And most tech companies will say, bring the technology and then we'll fix the process later. And it's like the story of my life with PPM. So I'm glad that you said focus on the process first. Do you find, and again, this is a selfish question of being a small business, we've got less than 10 people. And one of the things that our team loves to do is to have involvement in, they like to be involved in all the projects and get involved in some aspect. Do you think it's more effective to have all your team involved in all the projects sort of in different ways based on their capabilities, or to create kind of little squads that focus on a specific product or service enhancement?
I would say the little squad model is probably where we're up to, but at the same time, I think communication across the organization is critical. And so we run basically like company-wide stand-ups, once every couple of weeks at a minimum, to basically make sure everyone's on the same page. And that's not, that's not a sort of a communication from the top down.
Mm-hmm.
That's everyone sharing what's going on, what do they think about, what are the issues. And it's different. We've evolved that probably. I'm particularly passionate about making sure that's super successful. Probably do it more often. So I'd say communicate broadly, but focus. In a team orientated or a little squad manner, I think is the fastest way to get stuff done. But I also think, as a company evolves, things change, right? I mean, we, Louis and I and Andrew, and there was a couple of others, and there's half a dozen back, as you said, 3.5 years ago. And I think when you're back at those days, you got to do everything. I mean, I did everything. Louis did everything. Andrew did everything.
Yes.
The entire team did everything. I think as we now have scaled, I don't do everything. I really try to make sure that I focus on a couple of things I think I do well or I need to do, but try the best we can to kind of delegate and empower people to do their things.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the term Chief Everything Officer. That's what really it stands for.
That's right. That's right.
Completely agree with that. And somehow, in amongst everything that you've done and your career today, you wrote a book, Chasing Digital Playbook. Can you tell us a bit about that? What is it about?
So Louis and I, so he's a co-founder of 6 Clicks, wrote Chasing Digital actually when we were at KPMG. We were looking out over the office skyline, and this was probably 2018, and talking about a bunch of stuff in the office, but formed a view that there's a lot of businesses out there where technology is going to disrupt the way that they operate. And at the time, there were a lot of sort of books and blogs and stuff like that about Google and Facebook and, like very startup orientated, which I think if you're a technology business and you're a startup was highly, relatable. But we felt that there was an opportunity to kind of articulate a playbook for large businesses or big businesses to help them think about technology and the digital opportunity in a different way. So we called it Chasing Digital, a playbook for the new economy.
Amazing.
And that was, we sort of knocked that out. Well, it probably took us, I don't know, 6 or 9 months, lots of weekends, hundreds of thousands of words, exhausting process in many ways. I don't know whether I'd recommend it. It's quite an ordeal, but satisfying, I guess, once you get to the end of it.
It's one of those things that's always on the sort of bucket list of things to do for most of us, as I've got some things on my bucket, but you just never get around to, especially when you're running your own business. And
right.
So I'm keen to read that, and I'll make sure to share it in the show notes so that people can actually access it as well. So I'm just sort of rounding out. One of the things I read that you're really big into music, and I wanted to know what has music done to support you on this journey, like what role did it play?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking. I think I mentioned my parents were quite musical. My dad was an academic in the space. My mum was a concert pianist. So I grew up around music a lot. I also played the cello. So I played the cello and I taught the cello for a little while. So I've always liked music. I actually probably like just about all types of music, not every type, but I love classical, love opera. I also like, popular stuff, jazz, whatever. And I find it like it's a big part of my life. I listen to music every day, whether it's exercising or relaxing or working or whatever it might be. But I use it as a way to sort of maybe manage anxiety, manage stress, just find, get your mind into that state of flow. But yeah, it's certainly a really big part of my life.
I love that you mentioned manage anxiety, manage stress. I'm keen. I'm keen to know what kind of music you listen to when you're in flow state, whether it's the same. I've got a colleague who listens to heavy metal. And I'm like,
different. Everyone's different.
I listen to a lot of my husband speaks Spanish, but I don't understand all the words. So I listen to Spanish music sometimes, or classical one, because I don't listen to something I understand the words, because it's a distraction for the thoughts that are going through my head for the work.
Yeah, 100%.
What's your common?
I'd probably be, it depends the type of work. I used to actually, when I spend more time in technology, I don't so much anymore, but when I'd sort of dabble with software stuff, I'd actually like quite technical music, but probably more now classical. I just sort of pick a particular piece.
Yes.
And I listen to different artists playing the same piece.
Yes.
To hear nuances or differences in their style. I just find that kind of interesting. The same work by Beethoven, whatever it might be, but then played by different orchestras or different pianists or whatever. So
it's so interesting. I was reading, I can't remember who he is now, and name doesn't cross my mind, but there was some entrepreneur I was following who said they listened to the same song on repeat for the entire time. And I thought, I don't know if I tried that once, but it wasn't really successful. But I guess you get into this kind of trance-like state by just listening to the same beats and rhythms and words. So I guess that's what it does. But anyways.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for everything you've shared so far. How can people get involved with 6 Clicks? Where can they go for more information?
I would just head to our website, to be honest, 6clicks.com. There's a ton of information there. If people want to check out the platform, then click the button, request a demo. I think that's probably the best way to approach it. There's all sorts of information there, depending on what you're interested in. So, 6clicks.com.
And as an avid user of the product, if anyone has questions about the day-to-day, they're welcome to reach out to our team. We can hopefully share some more. Before we wrap up today, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners, a call to action, a piece of advice, or a question to ponder today?
No, not really. I've really enjoyed the conversation with you, and be very happy to follow up with anyone in your network or broader community. But thanks very much for the questions and the thought that you've put into that. It was a really good discussion. So thank you.
No worries. Thank you for joining me.
It's all right. No problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Please share this with someone or rate it if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to follow us on social media, and to stay up to date with all things Agile ideas, go to our website www.agilemanagementoffice.com. I hope you've been able to learn, feel, or be inspired today. Until next time, what's your Agile idea?